lime is by far the most important thing we need to start off with, because it's the gatekeeper for all other nutrients in the soil, for pK, and the fact that it helps to regulate soil biology that mineralise the nitrogen for us. It also is the gatekeeper in terms of mineralisation as well.
Hello, I'm Stuart Childs and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy Podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With recent figures showing very poor growth from plots that are receiving no nitrogen relative to other years, today I'm joined by William Burchill, lecturer in soil science in UCC, to discuss what might be going on under our feet and what we should be doing over the next few weeks to maximise growth. But I started by asking William to give me his thoughts on the lower than expected performance on the zero-N plots as reported by Anya Murray recently.
Yeah, well, sure. I'd say in terms of what are the factors that drive mineralisation, one of the main things that will drive mineralisation during the course of the year is soil temperature. And you also have to have oxygen and air in the soil as well. Like when the bugs in the soil are mineralising nitrogen for us, they need oxygen and they need some level of moisture. But I think this year we've kind of had kind of extremes in weather, obviously. The spring was very wet, soils were waterlogged for long periods of time, and while moisture obviously wasn't lacking there, but oxygen probably was. So that I think there's some factor there that soils were waterlogged for a long time. There wasn't oxygen, so mineralization couldn't occur. And then I feel as well that this year in terms of the weather, like we went from being very wet and then we got quite dry again, like, do you know what I mean? Quite quickly. So then we probably went to a state where maybe moisture was actually limiting mineralization then. And like, I suppose there are two of the factors I think that are kind of at play. And another one with mineralization is actually what actually suits mineralization during the course of the year is if you kind of get these what we call drying and wetting cycles. And literally what you're talking about here is you could have dry weather for maybe a week and then get a day's rain, and then you might have 4 or 5 days dry again and then get another day's rain. We often see that on the ground ourselves. We often see that we'd have a dry period of weather, then you get the rain, and then you just see that little flush of growth, like you get the greening in the grass, and we kind of say the grass freshens. And literally what's happening there is, the soil has been dried out, it opens up the soil, lets the oxygen in, then you get a flush of water. The bacteria then can start working again and they'll just start driving out nitrogen then from the soil. So we often kind of see that ourselves on the ground.
While you said there we went from a very wet spell to a dry spell, while it was dry, it wasn't all that dry in a way, like as in it's not been extreme heat which has caused ground to crack, or like we have drought-like conditions in places at the moment without a drought in a way, really, like. And we haven't gotten the ground to open up as much as you'd expect in. And that has, like, I suppose the way, from listening to what you're saying, it's like if you go back to maybe May or June and you broke the ground, you'd find that the top inch maybe or two might be very dry, but underneath it was still damp. But is that enough to actually do the harm that you're talking about in terms of limiting things happening? Like,
yeah, like I suppose like ground got, while it wasn't overly dry and there was still moisture there, you could say the ground got stale like on top, like, do you know what I mean? I think ground got stale, and we didn't get, while ground was wet, maybe a bit underneath, like, but there wasn't this cycling between dry and then getting a bit of rain and then dry and getting a bit of rain. That really does help and suit mineralization. And look, on at farm level then as well, like, another reason why mineralization might be back as well is that when we had the wet spring, obviously there was a certain level of damage done to swards as well in the spring, and that would have reduced growth from a sward damage point of view. But also something as well that we mightn't see as much is that as the year went on, like, some of those swards were compacted. And when you get compaction, like, one of the main disadvantages of compaction is that, you actually fill in the pores of air in the soil. They're all squeezed down, compacted down. and that limits the amount of oxygen that can get in. And when you don't have oxygen in them pores, then it can reduce the amount of mineralization that you'll actually get as well. Like, do you know what I mean? So I think that that's a factor at play as well. Also as well, like we have to remember that mineralization is a process that's driven by the biology in the soil. And if we have a case where we had slightly lower temperatures, a bit of compaction, as well in terms of with the fertilizer register there, and cash flow has obviously been tight on farms this year. It's been a tough year. Like, you know, is the amount of P and K that's been spread, has that been kept up to date? Like, so I mean, that's one question I would have. I think that, like, and again, like P and K, and also look, we're- people are tired of us talking about it now at this stage, but lime as well. Like, having the lime at the right, in the right bracket there, in that kind of 6.3 to 6.5, we often say that that's the best bracket to have availability of P and K in the soil, but it's also the best bracket in terms of having the soil biology working at its best to actually break down the soil nitrogen and actually get soil mineralization as well. Like, do you know what I mean? So
So William, if I'm picking you up right now, because obviously we're both very conscious of P allowances, and they can be tricky to establish, and also tricky to kind of stay in line with them, and maybe that's what's caused people to back off a little bit, and we've seen it in the past before, that where people back off the P, they back off the K, and there's no necessary reason for that. They can still do nitrogen and K products are there, and they can obviously spread the K beyond the 15th or the 14th of September as well if they need to. But from what you just said there, I'm thinking lime is the number one element that people should be looking at and trying to go with, especially if there are bits of issues like you've discussed there already in terms of lower microbial activity, the pore size, etc., of the soil being affected and so forth. Like, I mean, if there's anything to get worms going, it's going to be lime. So is lime the thing that people should be turning to straight away? And yes, there's a P and K element to it potentially, because we're definitely back. The figures from last year would show that we were well back on P and K fertilizer usage as well. So that's a concern, and that happened back in 2009 as well. So like these tough years, they do make people make decisions around finances, which is obviously understandable, but they could be counterproductive. And yes, lime has gotten expensive relative to what it used to be. It used to be extremely cheap, but it's still cheap. And that should be the first thing that people should be doing over the next number of weeks, is trying to slot lime into rotations and correct lime status where they know what's wrong.
yeah, it's true. Like, people often forget that, like, lime is essentially a soil conditioner as well. It affects, it lifts the pH, and that helps to condition the soil as well. People talk about you putting on too much lime, and it makes the ground soft, like, but maybe, like, maybe that's what's almost needed now. Like, it's been compacted like so much this year, like, do you know what I mean? Um, like, and again, being conscious of cash flow this year, like, lime is by far the most important thing we need to start off with, because it's the gatekeeper for all other nutrients in the soil, for pK, and the fact that it helps to regulate soil biology that mineralize the nitrogen for us. It also is a gatekeeper in terms of mineralization as well. So that's vitally important, the first thing to do. And again, like, look, this time of the year, it's absolute ideal time for lime. You're going into the period of the year where you're going into long rotations between grazing. A lot of second cuts are finished up now at this stage as well. And at the moment now as well, like, ground conditions are good. We should take that opportunity now. We saw what happened last autumn. If we wait and ground gets wet, the lime just won't go out. And as well, like, look, for people who are putting in clover as well. Like, the target pH for grasslands has always been 6.3 to 6.5. But for where you're looking for clover, like, you are talking about being at the upper side of that, like, you are talking about 6.5, and that's where we need to be. And a lot of people will go away and look at their soil samples, and there'll be a 6.1 and 6.2, and say, oh, sure, look, we're pretty much there. But I would argue that they aren't. that those paddocks could do with a bit of lime now, bring them up from the 6.1 or 2 up to the 6.5. Um, I think that's a good thing for the autumn. The other thing as well that I always say in the autumn as well is that it's a great time as well in terms of getting potassium on. If we talk about return on investment in terms of actually putting grass on a farm, lime number one. The second one then would be K, and particularly in the context of silage reserves as well. Um, K is the one that will really drive yield, and a lot of clients have been doing. When I was working on the giant program there with yourself, Stuart, a lot of guys were putting on that bit of K in the silage ground, particularly where indexes were low. And like they've come back to me since, and I've met them over the last 6 months now again, and that they've really said that they've come back to me and said they've noticed the difference in terms of this actual silage yield. And one way I'd sum up the K into something that an older advisor said to me there recently, and I thought was a great line and it stood with me, he said that K fills the trailers. And if there ever was ever a year that we needed that, and if we want to put ourselves in a good position for next year, going back, look at the soil samples and getting out the K on the ground that's low as well, in terms of action points, in terms of fertilizer, and trying to make sure we have put ourselves in the best step for next year. Getting that lime out and getting the K out now in the autumn would be a very good step for that to set us up for next year.
Okay, so William, then the other one, I suppose the one that's on the top of everybody or the tip of everybody's tongue is the nitrogen. So obviously we did an adjustment to the allowance there a couple of weeks. Well, the allowance was left as it was, I suppose, rather than an adjustment to it. And people are asking lots of questions about what, like there's stuff in the journal there about calculating people's what they're allowed to spread and so forth. And people are wondering what should they spread now, like what should they spread in terms of the artificial applications, but also what can we expect in terms of normally this time of the year you'd see, like you said, there's when the soils get a bit damper again, we get a flush of growth. Like how much can we expect maybe to come from that maybe, and what are the application rates that people should be thinking about going with over the next week or 10 days really, I think is probably the best advice, is it?
Yeah, yeah. Look, in terms of what will come from the soil, sure, it's a hard one to say, but in general, in a normal year with mineralization, normally in the springtime it's low because temperature limits it. Then we get into May, we get rapid growth, we get plenty moisture, plenty temperature in the soil, we get a lot of mineralization. Then generally during the summertime that takes a dip. It dips there because you probably soils get a bit dry, in the summertime. But then in the autumn, you actually have a perfect conditions again for mineralization. You have warm soil temperatures. The ground has been warmed up all year. And then, as ground starts to get a bit wet, then again, moisture starts coming on again for the autumn. You can get a second flush of mineralization now coming into the autumn. Like to put numbers on that short is hard, but I would say that people should expect that will come now. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that will come now in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
And William, is it fair to say that that could be better than people might expect then as well, in that, like, there's within reason a lot of the normal nitrogen levels have been applied throughout the course of the summer. We haven't really gotten huge return from it, so that nitrogen is still sitting there floating around waiting to be used by the microbes. Like, so when we do get the flush, we might get, when we do get that dampness, we get a bit of extra growth than what we might normally see, like, which will obviously be a good thing because there's people under pressure for fodder stocks and so forth. So, like, and I know I'm asking you to crystal ball gaze here now and saying this, like, but if the conditions come as we would hope they would, there should be nitrogen still in the soil there, ready to be used, like.
Yeah, yeah. Like there will be plenty of nitrogen. And if you think about look short, if we get the right conditions for mineralization, we have to remember that there could be anywhere from 8 to 10 tons of organic nitrogen in the soil, in every hectare. So if we get the right conditions for mineralization, that will take off now, like I said, do you know what I mean? And like I suppose in terms of making decisions then around fertilizer, like what I would say in terms of planning out for autumn fertilizers. Look, number one, you have to just sit down and see what's left over in your allowance, okay? That's obviously very important to know what's the limit in terms of what you have left over that you can spread. Then look, the other thing as well, I think that's when it comes into awesome fertilizer application as well is, like what's the average farm cover on the farm today? And what's the demand? And what's your demand for grass going to be now for the next 6, 8 weeks? Like, so I mean, you need to have that plan that out. If demand is declining and you have a high average farm cover, is there much point in putting on a lot of nitrogen and driving on a very high average farm cover? Will you be able to utilize it? But there'll be people on the other side of the coin then who are, you know, they won't have, may not have the option to reduce demand, and they need to grow as much grass as they possibly can. So like, I think for the people that, if you have the allowance and you need the grass and you have the demand to use it, you'd be talking about 30 units. Then on the flip side of that, you'll have people who maybe their demand is declining. They have a good average farm cover coming into the end of August. Maybe something around the 20 units would be appropriate there. And maybe allowances may not only allow for that, but like you're going to be in that bracket between 20 to 30 units. Um, as well, just in terms of the awesome fertilizer application, like, one thing I'd always say to people is that you should be aiming to maybe go out with your final fertilizer, your final blanket spread there around the last week of August. As and we've all seen it there now the last few weeks, day length is declining. The evenings are tucking in and the mornings are tucking in. So going there the end of August, at least you're going to capitalize on the really good or better growth that you'll have for the first 2 weeks of September. Like from every week on, from the end of August, for every week on, day length is declining. In general, on an average year, the response to fertilizer starts to decline as well from the 1st of September on. So, like the aim of putting on that fertilizer and at the end of August, the aim of that is to grow your wedge of grass in front of you, like, do you know what I mean? Um, and I think that end of August period is the best time in terms of maximizing the response from that final kind of blanket spread of fertilizer for the year.
There's another bit then, William, I suppose, from the point of view of like the rationale for going early with that. There's still nitrogen on the farm in the form of soil, water, and slurry as well. So people can make use of the slurry until the end of September, and then we'll say soil water can come into the picture. Then again, along with it maybe, and after that, then soil water is still available to be spread. So people aren't necessarily limited by nitrogen, really, if they think about it. Like,
No, no, definitely not. Definitely not. Like, and I think you need to be strategic. Kind of use your fertilizer earlier. If we're going to be hitting peak covers there, say towards the end of September, if you put on the fertilizer, say the 1st of September, the end of August, that's giving that fertilizer an entire month to grow that peak cover. Whereas if you put it on the middle of September, it's only 2 weeks.
and 2 weeks of reducing growth, as you've already outlined, like that, it's going to be for like the real kick is from that for early part of September, like.
It is, yeah, like that's what's gonna decide whether you grow your cover, your awesome cover or not, like, do you know what I mean? So, like, sometimes there's this talk that, oh, if we put on the fertilizer too early, it'll run out of steam. And like we also just earlier on in our conversation, we talked about the mineralisation piece. And to be honest with you, the level of growth rates that we get, kind of, if we put on the fertilizer now in the 1st of September, that'll give us 3, 4 weeks of growth. And like, to be honest, between the bits of dirty water that go on then later on and the soil mineralization, that's enough then to carry the growth, the type of growth rates that we get then into October, like, do you know what I mean? So, that's making full use of the fertilizers you have. I put it on early, um, let it grow the grass then for September. When you get into October, then you'll have some dirty water that's gone out in late September. That'll grow the grass into October for you. And there'll be enough mineralization then at that point then to cover the potential for grass growth then in October. Um, that's that's um that's the best way to do it. Like another thing as well that just came up there in recent times as well is that the amount of pressure that people were under as well last spring in terms of slurry and dirty water. And you know, I think it's really prudent now that second cuts are done, that, any slurry that's left over in tanks now should be emptied, get it out in the silage ground. Again, that will be a fertilizer then to grow our wedge of grass on that ground as well. And use the dirty water. Like there was there's recent studies there in Teagasc, and they found that, like, we're recording, the amount of slurry inside in tanks, and they found that tanks were up to 20% full going into the close period last year. And that was a lot of that was obviously down to ground conditions. But when ground conditions are right now, we should be getting that slurry out. And again, that's another form of nitrogen that we can use to build our cover for the autumn as well and make good use of it.
Okay, so I suppose, William, is it the point maybe that people need to be working away with that slurry, obviously up until the end of September, and the dirty water simultaneously, because you can't run the risk of trying to hold it, or trying. Maybe people might have been trying to hold on to a bit of the dirty water in particular last year, I think, with a view to spreading it later. And then as the conditions got worse, obviously they couldn't spread then, and maybe that might have to start going into slurry storage then to hold on to it. And obviously then they can't spread it and so forth. So people need to be working away on that the whole time, especially while the weather conditions are good.
Yeah, like I tell you, yeah, and in terms of the way I sum it up is, like, put on the fertilizer at the 1st of September and let the fertilizer grow your grass for September. Put on your dirty water towards the end of September and let that grow your grass for October. Where I know obviously you're not going to have enough to put across the whole farm. And then from there on for the rest of the year, the soil mineralisation then will be enough then to carry what potential growth you'll be getting. I think that's the way I would sum it up. Again, in terms of positioning ourselves for good growth for next year, again, just in terms of what needs to be done now in the autumn, again, I just go back and look at the soil samples, get the lime out, and also look at that potassium piece as well. And, like, a very rough rule of thumb for people on that is that it takes about 50 units of K to build one index. Do you know what I mean? And at least this time of the year as well, we're going into a time of the year when the risk of luxury K uptake is low because growth rates are kind of start coming to decline. Like, so it's a good time of the year to go on with potassium.
So there isn't too much fear of K doing any harm at the moment anyway, with the rates of feeding that's gone into places anyway. So I suppose, William, just to sum it up, from my point of view, I think, like we've always been talking about soil fertility, you put a particular emphasis on it when you came and joined us on the joint programme there a couple of years ago. And we definitely saw the benefits from the farmers that we'll say that you worked closely with at the time. So it's simple stuff, it's basic stuff, but it's easily forgotten. And like going back to basics can often be the cornerstone of getting a farm going again. And it's probably very pertinent today in relation to the lime in particular. And I know people will say we're harping on about it, like you said there a while ago, and Cahill said it there a couple of weeks ago as well. But like people are worried about P status and so forth, and this product will actually release P that's in the soil there already. Like, so people are all bothered that they have a high index for soil for P and they've no P allowance and so forth, but their lime status is at 5.8 or 5.9. People need to correct these and actively charge or go about correcting their soil fertility. And yes, there is a cost to it, but they will reap the rewards for it. As you said there, I think it's a good one. The K fills the trailers. Like K is a forgotten fertilizer to a certain extent, and it has a huge role to play. So pH and potassium are two things that people need to correct before the end of the year if they can at all, or be working towards that. And hopefully that will drive better performance for next year. And obviously there's weather conditions involved in it and so forth as well. But is that a fair summation of it? Maybe
like you say, Stuart, look, whatever weather comes, like, we can't control that, but we have to look after the things that we can control ourselves, and the one fear I would have with K is that usually K usage follows P usage, and when the register is there now as well, I think that there's a fear that people won't use their full P allowance as well that they have. And if people aren't using P, generally what can happen is that K doesn't get spread either. Do you know what I mean? That's the fear that I would have. And even look in the final point as well, like on this, the type of weather we've had this year again and the last few years, like that bit of K during the summertime as well. Like again, I've recommended this to a lot of clients through the last few years. Is that 29,014 K with a bit of sulfur? When ground gets dry and hard in the summertime, and you've got a lack of moisture, like K can help grass during drought periods. And also another thing as well that's there with K is during dry soil conditions, K movement in the soil can be limited as well. So having a small bit of a readily available K can be a benefit as well. So just for people to remember that and to keep that in mind as well, like even for planning for fertilizer for next year as well, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's and that's a good point to finish on, William, in that planning for next year is important as well, and that, like as you said there about the 29,014, people should maybe be building that into their plan for the coming year, and helping to address those K indexes on their farms and maintaining them in particular. Even if they have a good K index, they should be working to maintain that as well. So we'll wrap it at that, William. Thanks for coming on today and giving us your insights, and we'll talk to you again. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.
That's all from this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to William Burchill for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.